From the time we're in like grade school, we are handed this invisible mathematical equation.
Oh, absolutely. The whole effort equals reward thing.
Exactly. It's drilled into us by our teachers, our parents, corporate culture, and it's treated with the exact same absolute certainty as the law of gravity, right?
Yeah.
Effort in, rewards out.
Yeah, which is just the foundational myth of the modern workforce. I mean, the underlying assumption there is that your physical and mental exhaustion is the actual currency you use to buy success.
Which is incredibly comforting when you think about it. It's a linear, predictable equation. You sweat, you grind, you put in those grueling 80-hour weeks at the office, and eventually, well, the universe is just obligated to magically convert that sheer force of will into wealth.
Right. But if you pause for just a second and look at the actual economic landscape we're living in today, that equation isn't just slightly miscalculated.
No, it's completely broken.
It's worse than broken. Operating on that equation today is like actively detrimental to your goals. The correlation between hard work and wealth creation has just been entirely severed.
Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're listening to this on your commute or, I don't know, while trying to clear out a mountain of emails, our mission today is to completely dismantle the illusion of the hard work hustle.
Yeah, and we're pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources for this.
We are. Specifically, excerpts from the Almanack of Naval Ravikant. It offers this radically different blueprint for how modern wealth is actually generated.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the most glaring flaw in the whole hustle philosophy is, well, it's obvious if you look at a restaurant kitchen.
Oh, the line cook example.
Right. If hard work directly equals wealth, why doesn't the line cook working 80 hours a week get rich?
Right.
I mean, they're on their feet, sweating, working harder physically and mentally than almost anyone sitting in a corner office.
Yeah, yet the wealth just isn't materializing for them.
Exactly.
Well, that line cook represents the absolute limits of an unleveraged environment. Their inputs and outputs are pegged at a strict 1-to-1 ratio.
Meaning 1 hour of work equals 1 hour of output. Right. Chopping onions for 1 hour yields exactly 1 hour's worth of chopped onions. You cannot chop onions while you sleep, and you definitely can't chop 10,000 onions simultaneously.
No, you definitely can't.
The source material makes this foundational claim right out of the gate that just challenges all our conditioning. It says making money is not an action you just go out and do. It's a skill that you learn.
A skill, okay.
And step one of learning that skill is recognizing that we no longer live in an era where inputs map directly to outputs.
Which is wild, because for almost all of human history, that 1-to-1 ratio was inescapable, If you were chopping wood to survive the winter, there was no shortcut.
No, you just had to chop a wood.
But trying to apply that agrarian mindset to the digital economy seems insane to me. I want to try looking at this through the lens of, pure physics.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine you're trying to move a 2,000-pound block of solid granite. If you use the hustle mindset, you just push against it with your bare hands. You can apply 10 times the effort, sweat 10 times as much, hire a motivational speaker to yell at you.
But the rock isn't moving.
Exactly. You get zero forward progress, just total exhaustion. But if you take a 10-foot steel bar, slide it under the rock, and push down on the far end, you lift the stone effortlessly.
Wow. Yeah.
The amount of force you applied didn't change, but the mechanism did.
What's fascinating here is how that physics analogy maps perfectly onto Naval's core philosophy about direction versus effort.
How so?
Well, if you're pushing the rock with your bare hands, 10 times the effort is simply 10 times the waste.
Oh, man, 10 times the waste.
Exactly. In the modern economy, if you don't know what you should be working on or you're using the wrong mechanism, the most critical thing you can do is just stop pushing.
Because blind hustle is a trap.
It is the ultimate trap. You must figure out your direction before you apply the effort, because we now live in an age of infinite leverage.
Leverage. That's one of those words that gets tossed around in boardroom meetings so often it has almost lost its meaning.
Oh, completely. It's totally overused.
But the text breaks leverage down into 3 distinct evolutionary classes, which I found super helpful. We traditionally think of leverage as hiring people labor or raising money capital.
Right. But the source actually highlights the massive friction inherent in those older models.
Friction like what?
Well, take labor. It's the oldest form of leverage, and frankly, it's the most chaotic. Sure, managing an army of 500 employees carries massive social status.
It's what built the pyramids.
Exactly. But managing human beings is incredibly messy. It requires constant emotional intelligence, HR infrastructure, navigating office politics.
Yeah, that sounds exhausting.
As the text bluntly points out, you are always one bad day away from a mutiny.
Which is probably why the wealthy historically transition to capital. I mean, money scales so much easier than people do.
It really does. Capital is the leverage of the 20th century. Managing $1 billion portfolio doesn't require vastly more physical calories than managing $1 million portfolio. Right. But both labor and capital share a fatal structural flaw for the average person listening to this right now.
And what's that?
They are both permissioned leverage.
Permissioned, meaning there's a gatekeeper.
Exactly. Someone has to decide to follow you for you to have labor.
Someone, whether it's a venture capitalist or a bank, has to decide to write you a check for you to have capital. You are constantly asking for permission to scale your efforts.
You're entirely at the mercy of someone else's approval. Which brings us to the massive paradigm shift we are living through right now.
The newest forms of leverage.
Yes, code and media. And the defining characteristic of code and media is that they are entirely permissionless.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the barrier to entry has completely evaporated. You do not need a gatekeeper's approval to sit down at your laptop and write a piece of software.
Nope. You don't need a television network's permission to record a podcast, shoot a video, or publish a book.
You just need a cheap computer and a Wi-Fi connection. And when you utilize this form of leverage, you tap into the economics of zero marginal cost.
That is the crucial mechanic to understand here. Let's say you write a piece of code. It takes you, 50 hours of intense effort.
That's your initial input.
Right. But distributing that code to 10 people costs the exact same amount of money and effort as distributing it to 10 million people.
Which is virtually zero.
Exactly. The source uses this brilliant imagery of an army of robots. Every piece of software you write, every podcast you record is a robot working tirelessly in a data center for you.
Oh, I love that. They don't sleep. They don't ask for raises.
And they multiply your initial 50 hours of effort by millions.
This totally annihilates the concept of the standard 40-hour work week. I mean, in a factory, you measure a worker's value by their time on the clock.
Yeah.
But the text brings up the phenomenon of the 1000x programmer. We always hear tech executives obsess over finding 10x employees.
Right. The mythical 10x engineer.
Yeah. But a truly brilliant programmer, someone like Satoshi Nakamoto, publishing the Bitcoin white paper in code, they create a correct architecture once, and it generates hundreds of billions of dollars in value.
Meanwhile, you could have 10 other brilliant engineers working 10 times as hard, pulling 80-hour weeks.
Doing the grind.
Yeah, but if they're writing code for a product nobody wants, or optimizing the wrong viral loop, their output is essentially zero.
So their physical input and the economic output are completely decoupled.
Completely.
So sitting at a desk from 9 to 5 just to visually signal to your boss that you are working is, well, it's absurd in a leveraged profession.
It's just a cosplay of the industrial age.
Cosplay, that's a great way to put it.
The text actually suggests that modern knowledge workers, anyone using their brain to solve problems, should stop functioning like factory workers.
And start functioning like what?
Like high-performance athletes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, an athlete doesn't run a marathon every single day at maximum heart rate. They train, they execute a highly focused, intense sprint, and then they rest, recover, and reassess their strategy.
I really like that athlete framework. Train, sprint, rest, reassess. But that introduces a terrifying variable into the equation, doesn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, if we have access to infinite permissionless leverage, say I write code that executes trades on the stock market, or I broadcast a message to 1 million followers moving in the wrong direction, isn't just a mild waste of time.
Wow.
It's catastrophic. I can make 1 million mistakes in a millisecond. If leverage is the engine of the car, you better have an incredibly precise steering system, or you're just driving off a cliff at the speed of sound.
That is exactly why the source identifies judgment as the ultimate indispensable multiplier.
Judgment.
Yes. It is the single most undervalued skill in the modern economy. If you have an army of digital robots waiting for your command, the only thing that actually matters is telling them to do the right thing.
I always struggle with the word judgment, though. It sounds like, a fancy corporate buzzword for gut instinct or intuition. Is the text just talking about having a good vibe about a decision?
Not at all. Gut instinct is largely emotional and reactive. The text provides a very grounded clinical definition.
Which is?
Judgment is the ability to accurately calculate the long-term consequences of your actions. It's wisdom applied to external problems.
Ah, okay. That makes sense.
And the value of judgment in a highly leveraged age is radically nonlinear. Take the example of a CEO steering a $100 billion company.
Okay.
If CEO A is right 75% of the time, and CEO B is right 85% of the time, CEO B isn't just getting a 10% bonus.
Because of the leverage.
Exactly. That 10% delta in accuracy, when multiplied by $100 billion of leverage, is worth hundreds of millions of dollars in market cap.
Wow. That reframes decision-making entirely. It means the decision itself is the final product. A factory worker's product is a physical widget. But for someone like Warren Buffett, his actual product is a simple yes or no.
Exactly right.
The text notes that Buffett might spend an entire year just reading, thinking, and evaluating a single company. He spends a year doing what looks like nothing.
Right. Nothing by industrial age standards.
Exactly. And then he spends one single day executing a trade. But that one day of action, deploying massive capital leverage based on highly refined judgment, generates wealth that compounds for decades.
And nobody is auditing Warren Buffett's timesheets to see if he was at his desk by 8:00 a.m.
No, definitely not.
They're paying him purely for the accuracy of his judgment. But here is the critical part for you, the listener.
Right.
You don't just wake up one morning with world-class judgment.
Right.
It has to be systematically built.
So how do we actually build it? Because sitting around thinking for a year sounds great, but most of us have actual deliverables, you know?
Well, building judgment requires two non-negotiable pillars. First, you need demonstrated credibility and accountability.
Meaning what?
You have to take risks under your own name. When you make a call, you must own the financial or reputational upside, but you must also bear the total brunt of the failure.
Oh, skin in the game.
Precisely. Nothing sharpens your ability to foresee long-term consequences quite like having your own skin in the game.
That makes a lot of sense. What's the second pillar?
Second, you have to cultivate what the source calls being a clear thinker.
The text makes a very sharp distinction there, actually. It says being called a clear thinker is a vastly superior compliment to being called smart. Why the big differentiation?
Because highly smart people, especially those who've been rewarded by the traditional academic system, often fall into the trap of memorization.
Right, just repeating what they learn.
Exactly. They learn incredibly complex, advanced concepts and use that jargon to signal their intelligence to their peers.
But clear thinkers are different.
Clear thinkers operate on a completely different frequency. They understand the absolute fundamentals of a field from the ground up.
First principles.
Yes. If you cannot rederive a complex concept from its foundational first principles, if you can't explain it simply you aren't actually thinking. You're just regurgitating memory.
That's a huge difference.
A clear thinker strips away their ego, their biases, and what they desperately wish the world looked like so they can see reality exactly as it is.
Okay, so the formula is becoming clear. We need to step away from permissioned leverage and utilize infinite permissionless leverage like code and media.
Yes.
And we need laser-sharp first principles judgment to direct it. But there's a massive roadblock here.
So just
to develop this world-class judgment, to actually process the world clearly enough to see the long-term consequences, you need an environment that the modern corporate world actively punishes.
You need empty time.
Yes, you need empty time.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, modern society practically demands that we signal our value through busyness. We are terrified of an empty calendar because, deep down, an empty calendar makes us feel irrelevant.
Yeah, if you tell your boss you need Thursday off just to stare at the wall and cultivate your judgment, you're probably getting fired.
You're definitely getting fired.
Yeah.
So, to protect our perceived value, we fill our days with short-term, low-leverage busy work. We answer Slack messages instantly just to prove we're engaged.
But the text is completely uncompromising on this point. It argues that you absolutely need empty space on your calendar.
You do.
It explicitly recommends having 1 to 2 days a week with absolutely no scheduled meetings where you are intentionally not busy.
There is a deep neurological reason for this, actually, which the source touches on when it talks about the monkey mind.
The monkey mind, I love that term.
Right. When your brain is constantly reacting to notifications, emails, and immediate crises, it's operating in a high cortisol survival state.
Like fight or flight.
Exactly. You literally lack the cognitive bandwidth to see beyond the next 5 minutes. But when you step away and allow yourself to be bored, your brain's default mode network activates.
And what does that do?
That is the biological engine responsible for pattern recognition, connecting disparate ideas, and actually evaluating long-term consequences. Great ideas. The kind of directional shifts that compound into massive wealth never arrive when you are stressed, rushed, or reacting.
Wow. I really want to challenge you, the listener, to do an audit right now. Just pull up your calendar for next week. Look at all the colored blocks.
It's usually a lot of blocks.
Right. Are you too busy doing coffee, jumping on alignment calls, and instantly replying to emails to actually sit down in a quiet room and think about the 10-year trajectory of your career?
It's a great question.
Are you just pushing that 2,000-pound boulder with your bare hands because the physical act of sweating makes you feel like you are being productive?
It is a highly uncomfortable mirror to look into, honestly. But escaping the hustle illusion requires us to step off that treadmill of blind execution. You have to literally engineer time to think, because your judgment is the only thing that actually scales.
There is a quote from Naval in the source material that perfectly encapsulates this entire dynamic. He says, "You get rich by saving your time to make money, not spending your time to save money."
That is profound. And it requires adopting an aspirational hourly rate.
What's that?
You need to assign a value to your time long before the market actually pays you that amount. Pick a number that feels almost absurd, $500 an hour, $1,000 an hour.
Okay.
If a task saves you less than that rate, you ignore it. If you can outsource it for less, you pay someone else to do it. You ruthlessly defend your time because your time is the only soil in which your judgment can grow.
Man, we have covered some massive paradigm-shifting ground today. Let's synthesize this for everyone listening. We started by looking at the line cook working 80 hours a week, right?
Right. Trapped in an equation where effort only yields linear, limited rewards.
The path out of that trap isn't to work 100 hours. It isn't to push the boulder harder. It is to step entirely outside of that broken equation.
It requires finding your specific, unique knowledge, the complex skills that feel like play to you, but look like grueling work to everybody else.
And once you identify that unique knowledge, you do not scale it by begging gatekeepers for permission leverage. You don't ask for a loan, and you don't hire a massive, messy workforce.
No, you apply permissionless leverage. You write code, you create media, you deploy an army of digital robots that operate at zero marginal cost and work for you while you sleep.
But because that leverage is infinite, the direction you point it is everything, so you fiercely protect your time.
Yeah, you say no to the endless cycle of performative busyness.
You allow your mind to rest so you can cultivate the clear first principles judgment required to steer your ship accurately. Because at the end of the day, making the right decision once is worth 1,000,000 hours of mindless execution.
Absolutely.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to mull over today. The source material argues that roughly 99% of our effort is actually wasted until we finally discover the 1% that truly compounds.
99%.
So take a hard, honest look at your daily routine. If you suddenly stop doing the 99% of things that are keeping you busy tomorrow, would your long-term success actually suffer? Or would you finally have the quiet, empty space needed to find the 1% that will change your life?
The real question is, are you going to keep pushing the boulder, or are you going to stop, step back, and find a lever?
Exactly. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the consensus, aggressively guard your empty time, and we will see you next time.